Blood of the Mountains. Chapter 1: The Homecoming. My name is James Elliott, and at 76, my heart's counting down its final 1,000 beats. For 9 years I haven't seen my son Nathan, former Navy SEAL, now running wilderness survival courses in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains. I arrived unannounced, driven by a premonition of disaster and the arrhythmic flutter in my chest, to check on the only blood I've got left in this world, possibly for the last time. Could I have known what would follow? That my visit would lance a festering wound, destroy his marriage to the beautiful Caitlin, and force us both to face demons we'd spent lifetimes running from. The Afghan desert taught me one thing: always stay vigilant. Because even in a paradise called Stone Valley, vipers lie coiled beneath every stone. I pulled my battered pickup to the shoulder about 20 yards from the house. The old Ford F-150, my faithful companion for the last 12 years, protested with a grinding squeal of brakes before going silent. Killing the engine, I leaned back against the cracked leather seat and fished the pill organizer from my breast pocket. Last meds you're chewing through, old man, I thought, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest. Dr. Reynolds had said I shouldn't worry, but I knew better. Only the dead have nothing to worry about. My time was trickling away like sand in an hourglass, and that's why I was here. Nathan's house stood exactly as I'd imagined it. Solid 2-story timber frame with a wide porch and a carved wooden sign swinging gently in the breeze. Elliott's Cascade Trails. I slipped the nitroglycerin tablet under my tongue and grabbed my weathered duffel bag from the passenger seat, all I'd packed after that call from the cardiologist. "Last chance, Mr. Elliott," the doctor had said, peering over his glasses at my EKG. "Enjoy each day and get your affairs in order." I nodded. The only unfinished business in my life had a name: my son Nathan. Hauling my old body from the truck, I felt my knees protest, especially the left one with its souvenir of Afghan shrapnel that surgeons couldn't extract. "Gift from the Mujahideen," I muttered habitually, stretching the leg. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon, and the sky above Stone Valley was deepening to indigo, promising coolness by nightfall. I limped toward the house, feeling my pulse hammering in my throat with each step. The door opened before I reached the porch. My son stood in the doorframe, 40 years old but looking a decade younger, lean, with the unmistakable bearing of special forces, close-cropped dark hair and a jagged scar running along his right cheekbone. I recognized my features in him, my nose, the shape of my eyes, but there was something else in his gaze I couldn't claim. Serenity, confidence, I couldn't quite place it. "Dad," his voice held more surprise than pleasure. I wasn't expecting you." Nobody ever did, I thought, but said instead. "Thought I'd stop by, was passing through, not far out of my way." A lie, and we both knew it. Nobody passes through Stone Valley by accident. You have to deliberately navigate the serpentine mountain roads to get there. "Of course," he nodded. "Come in." Nathan stepped aside, letting me cross the threshold into a life where I'd long been relegated to the margins. The living room greeted me with the crisp scent of pine resin and worn leather. Large windows faced the mountain range, and the walls were decorated with expedition photographs and outdoor equipment. Everything spoke of an active, healthy existence, the polar opposite of my stagnant life in Portland suburbs. "Caitlin," Nathan called out, "we have a guest." She emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, a slender blonde with a kind of understated beauty that reveals itself gradually. She looked about 35, though I knew she was closer to 40. Her movements betrayed a natural grace, and her eyes, large and expressive, instinctively evaluated me. "James," she said, "what a surprise." Not Dad, not Mr. Elliott, just James. In that simple address I detected something beyond formality: wariness, antipathy. I couldn't pinpoint it precisely, but my old reconnaissance instinct quietly whistled a warning. "Hello, Caitlin," I nodded. "I hope I won't impose if I stay a while." "Not at all," she smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. "We always welcome guests." We stood in a triangle of awkward silence, until Nathan finally broke it. "Dad, let me show you to your room. You must be tired from the road." "Yes, thank you." Climbing the stairs behind my son, I felt a sudden weakness, the product of 10 hours behind the wheel and a heart condition Nathan knew nothing about. I gripped the railing tighter, silently willing my body not to betray me now. The guest room was small but comfortable. A double bed, dresser, nightstand, and a window overlooking the forest. "Make yourself at home," Nathan said, setting my bag by the bed. "Bathrooms down the hall to the right, dinner's at 7. He had already turned toward the door when I called after him. "Nathan." "Yes." "You look good, son." An expression flickered across his face, perhaps surprise at hearing those words from my lips. "Thanks you. You're looking well yourself," he said, and I almost believed the polite fiction. When the door closed behind him, I sank heavily onto the bed. On the dresser stood a photograph, Nathan and Caitlin against a mountain backdrop, tanned and happy. Beside it was an older shot, my son in his Navy SEAL uniform, rifle in hand, full combat gear. My eyes lingered on a third photo pushed to the far corner, Nathan and me when he was about 10, standing by a lake with fishing rods. He's smiling, I'm looking somewhere off camera. I couldn't remember when that picture was taken, which said more about me than I cared to admit. I lay down, closing my eyes, trying to quiet the painful fluttering in my chest that had taken up permanent residence there. Aye. Morning caught me off guard. I'd slept almost 14 hours, something that hadn't happened since I left active service. The sun had already climbed high, bathing the room in amber light. Groaning, I pulled myself up, feeling my joints pop like distant gunfire. In the shower, I let the hot water lash against scars and wrinkles that had transformed my body into a roadmap of a hard-lived life. I studied my face in the mirror, deep furrows across my forehead, gray eyebrows, bristly stubble. Deanna used to say I had beautiful eyes. I wondered if she would say the same now. Downstairs, I found Nathan at the table with a coffee mug and a tablet. Caitlin stood by the stove, turning something in a skillet. "Good morning," I said, sitting across from my son. "Morning," he replied, looking up from his screen. "Sleep well." "Fine," I lied. No point telling him about the nightmares that visited nightly, burning mountains, wounded men screaming, the sensation of someone else's blood on my hands. Caitlin placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please, black." She poured me a cup and stepped away without another word. I noticed her rub her temple, as if in pain. "Everything okay, honey?" Nathan asked. "Killer headache," she answered. "I think it's turning into a migraine. I should probably lie down." Of course, Nathan nodded, concern evident. "Rest up." Caitlin left the kitchen without even glancing in my direction. Did she actually quicken her pace as she passed me, or was I imagining it? Nathan finished his coffee and checked his watch. "I need to head out," he said. "I have a meeting with gear suppliers in Redwood City. It's about an hour from here." "I see," I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness. What was I thinking coming here? That we'd sit around chatting like old friends. "Sorry, I didn't know you were coming," he added, apparently noticing my expression. "Otherwise, I would have rescheduled, but this is an important contract." "It's fine," I stopped him. "I'll find something to do." Nathan nodded, shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other. "There are guidebooks to the area in the living room drawer. The town's small but charming. Town square, a few shops, cafes." "Don't worry, son. Just do what you need to do. I won't get lost." When the front door closed behind him, I remained alone in an unfamiliar house, feeling like an intruder. I wandered through the rooms, studying the life my son had built without me. In his office, trail maps with markings, financial documents neatly arranged in folders. In the living room, awards and expedition photographs on the wall. Behind each image lay a story I would never hear. Under a glass case on the mantelpiece lay Nathan's Navy dog tags and a silver star, awarded for an operation in the Hindu Kush Mountains that I'd learned about from newspapers rather than from him. On the shelf to the right stood a frame with a photograph of Nathan and his comrades, all in camouflage, weapons at the ready. I recognized that look, the gaze of men who had seen death and grown accustomed to its presence. The same look I saw in my mirror every morning. The house was shrouded in silence, but it was a deceptive silence. Somewhere a floorboard creaked, followed by soft muttering. Caitlin must have been talking on the phone in her bedroom. I recalled her pale face, the sudden ailment that appeared when she saw me. Something was off, and my old instincts had never failed me. Sitting in the house, feeling like a thief peeking into someone else's life, was unbearable. I decided to walk through the town Nathan had mentioned. At the doorway, I turned back, and my intuition told me to bring my phone with its primitive camera function, rudimentary by modern standards but functional. Who knows when an old reconnaissance man might need it? Aye. Stone Valley proved to be exactly as I'd anticipated. A small mountain town with a single main street lined with modest shops, diners, and offices. I walked slowly, memorizing the layout of buildings and faces of passers-by, an old military habit that decades of civilian life hadn't erased. The police station, a brick building with a flag and weathered sign. The post office, a yellow structure with a blue mailbox by the entrance. Mountain Health Pharmacy, its window displaying cold remedies and insect repellents. A typical town on the edge of the Cascades, lost in time. On the central square sat a family diner called Ruby's, a cozy establishment with a red and white awning and metal tables outside. Deciding I could use some sustenance, I entered, greeted by a jingling doorbell. Inside smelled of fresh pastries and coffee. The few patrons, apparently locals, looked up from their plates to inspect me with curious glances. Strangers were rarities in such places. I chose a table by the window, offering a good view of both the entire room and the street. A waitress, a plump, middle-aged woman with a name tag reading Maggie, brought me a menu and offered a professional smile. First time in Stone Valley? Yes, I answered, visiting my son. Oh, who would that be? I know just about everyone around here. Nathan Elliott. Recognition flashed in her eyes. Nathan, wonderful young man. He runs that wilderness guide company, right? He took my nephew and his friends up through Eagle Peak last summer. They still talk about it. Yes, he's a survival instructor. And a darn good one from what I hear, she winked. What can I get you? Coffee and a slice of apple pie, if you have it. Best in the county, she declared proudly, coming right up. When she walked away, I allowed myself to relax and look around more carefully. The diner was decorated in a 1950s retro style. Red leather booths, black and white checkered floor, an old jukebox in the corner. Photographs of local landscapes and vintage advertisements hung on the walls. Maggie brought my order, and I was about to sample the pie when I happened to glance toward the far corner of the establishment. What I saw made me freeze with my fork suspended in midair. In a dimly lit nook, almost hidden from most patrons, sat Caitlin. The same Caitlin who, an hour ago, had been lying at home with a terrible migraine. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat a tall man in a sheriff's uniform with the insignia of office, a broad-shouldered blonde with military bearing and an inscrutable face. They were talking, leaning toward each other across the table, their hands touching, and then, I could hardly believe my eyes, she leaned in and kissed him with such obvious passion that I had to look away. My initial reaction was complete bewilderment. Perhaps they had some special marital arrangement, an open relationship. But then I noticed how Caitlin glanced around, as if afraid of being spotted. This wasn't the behavior of a woman in an openly acknowledged relationship. I turned to the window, using the reflection in the glass to continue my observation. They were exchanging papers. Caitlin pulled an envelope from her purse, which the sheriff quickly reviewed and tucked into his inner pocket. Then he passed her a folded sheet, which she placed in her bag without reading. I needed to decide what to do with this information. Tell Nathan, but tell him what exactly. Your wife is kissing the sheriff and exchanging documents with him. Without context, it could appear as mere jealousy from an old man trying to drive a wedge between son and daughter-in-law. I slowly finished my coffee, left money on the table, and slipped out unnoticed, not waiting for change. I needed to gather more information before drawing conclusions. IV. On my way home, I chose a route along the river, hopping to clear my thoughts and calm my accelerating heartbeat. An old stone bridge ahead offered a good view of the valley. I decided to stop there to catch my breath. But before I reached the bridge, I noticed a familiar figure. Caitlin stood by the parapet, checking her watch. Instinctively, I retreated into the shadow of overgrown bushes, thanking fate that I hadn't yet entered her field of vision. Within a minute, a short, nervous man in a denim jacket approached her, despite the warm day. They exchanged a few words, and I observed Caitlin looking around, checking for witnesses. At that moment, a third person joined them, the sheriff, materializing as if from thin air. He removed a small package from his pocket and handed it to the nervous man, who immediately concealed it under his jacket. In exchange, the man extended an envelope to the sheriff, who didn't even bother to check its contents. I remained motionless, afraid of drawing attention with a snapping twig or rustling leaves. Every fiber of my being screamed that I was witnessing a drug deal. I wasn't naive and knew what an illicit substance exchange looked like. I'd seen enough of them in Afghanistan and later, working security in Portland's troubled neighborhoods. But what role did my son's wife play in this scheme? Why was the sheriff, a man sworn to fight drug trafficking, personally participating in it? And most importantly, did Nathan know? While I frantically processed the situation, the trio dispersed. The man in the denim jacket strode quickly toward the bus station. The sheriff climbed into his patrol car, and Caitlin headed to a silver SUV parked nearby. I pulled out my phone and, using the zoom function, took several photos. The quality was poor, but the faces were discernible, as was the actual exchange of the package. Not exactly damning evidence, but better than nothing. With a heavy heart, I continued toward my son's house, sifting through possible explanations for what I'd witnessed. Could Caitlin be an undercover agent conducting an investigation? But why kiss the sheriff? No, something far darker and more dangerous was happening here, and my son was at its epicenter. Returning to the house, I discovered that Caitlin hadn't arrived yet. I went up to the guest room and, closing the door, began methodically recording everything I'd seen: times, locations, descriptions. An old scout's habit: document everything, even if no one ever reads those notes. Nathan returned around 6 in the evening, in high spirits. "Dad," he called from the hallway, "you home?" I came downstairs, concealing my notebook in my pocket. "How was the meeting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice normal. "Excellent," Nathan beamed. "Secured a contract for new equipment at a great price. Now we can offer clients even safer expeditions." He genuinely loved his work. It showed in his eyes, in his gestures, in the way he talked about routes and gear. My son had found his calling, and I lacked the courage to shatter it with my crude intrusion and suspicions. "Where's Caitlin?" he asked, glancing into the kitchen. "Don't know," I answered honestly. "I've been in town all day." At that moment, the front door slammed, and Caitlin entered wearing athletic clothes with a yoga mat tucked under her arm. "Hi, honey," she smiled at Nathan, kissing his cheek. "How did it go?" "Wonderfully, the contract is ours." She looked at me, and I noticed an instantaneous change in her expression, the fake smile replaced by something resembling vigilance. "James, how did you like our little town?" "Very charming," I replied, holding her gaze. "Especially the people, very friendly." Something in my tone made her tense. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, as if trying to determine exactly what I knew. "I need a shower," she said, turning toward the stairs. "Yoga was intense, I'm drenched." I couldn't help myself. "And how was the class?" She glanced over her shoulder. "Wonderful, even helped with the migraine." "Remarkably therapeutic effect," I noted. When she went upstairs, Nathan looked at me with mild confusion. "Is something wrong?" "We need to talk," I said quietly, privately. "About what?" "Not here, let's go to the backyard." Nathan frowned but followed me through the kitchen to the backyard, where a pair of garden chairs faced the mountains. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in orange and pink hues. "What's going on, Dad?" he asked when we sat down. I took a deep breath, knowing I might permanently destroy my relationship with my son. But to remain silent meant exposing him to danger. "I saw your wife in town today," I began. "First at the diner, then by the bridge." And his voice took on an irritated edge. "She's often in town. She has business there, friends." "She was with the sheriff," I continued. "They were kissing. I don't mean to imply anything, but it looked very much like she's having an affair, son." Nathan's face froze, then he laughed uncertainly. "What nonsense! Caitlin and Sheriff Caldwell, they barely know each other." "I saw it with my own eyes, son, and that's not all." I took out my phone and showed him the photos I'd managed to take. The quality was poor, but Caitlin, the sheriff, and the third person exchanging items were distinguishable. "Okay, I recognize them, but what's this supposed to mean?" Nathan asked coldly. "It's a drug deal," I said directly. "Your wife and the sheriff are involved in drug trafficking, and I'm afraid they might be using your mountain roots as cover." A heavy pause followed. I watched emotions cycle across my son's face: disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally cold fury. "You've always ruined everything," he said quietly, and the calmness disturbed me more than shouting would have. "Couldn't be a good father, couldn't keep mom. Now you're trying to destroy my marriage." "Nathan, listen." "No, you listen." He jumped to his feet. "I know you're lonely. I know it's hard for you to see others happy, but that doesn't give you the right to come here and invent filthy stories about my wife. You show up out of nowhere with this garbage and expect me to listen. Maybe you're developing dementia, Dad." "I'm not inventing anything." I stood up too, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm concerned for your safety. If they're using your roots to transport drugs, you could be at risk. Or worse, they could set you up, make you the fall guy if something goes wrong." Nathan looked at me with such undisguised contempt that I almost physically felt the blow. "You know what your problem is, Father. You see enemies everywhere. You live in a world of conspiracies and betrayals. For you, there are no simple explanations, only complex theories about how everyone is trying to deceive you." "I saw what I saw," I repeated stubbornly. "You saw what you wanted to see," he shouted. "Caitlin was probably talking to Ray about work. She helps organize rescue courses for tourists that the sheriff's office conducts. They exchange documents, plans, routes. That's all." "Was the passionate kiss part of the work process too?" I asked quietly. "Kiss?" he laughed bitterly. "In those blurry photos of yours, you can barely make out the faces. You see what you want to see, old man." That hurt, not so much the accusation, but the way he pronounced the words "old man," with the same intonation I once used when speaking of my own father, whom I despised for his weakness. "I'm trying to protect you," I said. "I don't need your protection. Never did. I'm already a grown, independent man." Vi. Nathan turned and walked into the house, leaving me alone in the backyard. I remained standing, watching the sunset stain the mountains blood red. Something had broken between us, perhaps forever. This had gone completely wrong. I returned to the house a few minutes later. Muffled voices drifted down from the upstairs bedroom, Nathan and Caitlin arguing. I couldn't make out the words, but the intonations were clear. He was asking questions, she was denying, her voice sounding offended and indignant. I climbed to the guest room and sat on the bed, feeling defeated. Could I actually be wrong? Had years of paranoia and loneliness distorted my perception, making me see threats where none existed? But then I remembered Caitlin's cold, calculating eyes, her instantaneous transitions from migraine to vigorous activity, the strange expression on the sheriff's face, the nervousness of the third participant in the deal. No, I wasn't wrong. And my son was in danger. The door flew open without a knock. Nathan stood on the threshold, his face contorted with anger. "Get out," he said quietly but firmly. "Father, your interference in our family is unacceptable. I want you gone by tomorrow morning." I stood up, feeling blood rushing to my face. "You can't just throw out your own father." "I can," he cut me off. "You arrived uninvited, accused my wife of infidelity and involvement in drug trafficking, insulted my good friend, Sheriff Caldwell. You have no evidence except blurry photos and your sick fantasies. I don't want to see you anymore. Not tomorrow, not ever." He slammed the door with such force that a photograph fell from the wall. I picked it up. Cracked glass now crossed our faces in that old shot by the lake. The dull pain in my chest returned with renewed intensity. I sat on the bed, took out my pill organizer and swallowed the medication. My chest constricted as if in a vice, and for a moment I thought this was the end. But the attack subsided, leaving cold sweat and trembling hands in its wake. I wasn't going to leave. I couldn't abandon my son to danger, even if he hated me. Something dark and dangerous was happening in Stone Valley, and Nathan had landed at its epicenter without even realizing it. Instead of packing, I took out my notebook and began methodically recording facts. License plate numbers for Caitlin and the sheriff, the time of their meeting, a description of the third person. I drew a rough map of the town, marking places where meetings occurred and possible escape routes. This was reconnaissance work, meticulous, thorough, requiring attention to the smallest details. At dawn, I quietly left the house. But instead of heading east toward the highway leading home, I drove in the opposite direction, to a roadside motel called Pine Cone Lodge on the outskirts of Stone Valley. The girl at reception didn't even look up from her magazine when I asked for a room. "How many nights?" was her only question. "Not sure yet," I replied. "Let's start with a week." $40 a night," she said, handing me a key. "Room 8, end of the hall. Breakfast from 7 to 9, but don't expect much, just coffee and donuts." The room was small, with worn furniture and thin walls through which came the snoring of a neighbor. But it suited me. From here, I could observe what was happening while remaining invisible. I couldn't leave my son in danger, even if he hated me. After all, protecting your children is a father's ultimate duty, and I intended to fulfill it, whatever the cost. Chapter 2: Dark Secrets of Stone Valley. Sleep eluded me. I tossed on the squeaking motel bed, listening to water dripping somewhere and an old refrigerator humming. The room at Pine Cone Lodge was exactly what one expects from cheap motels on the outskirts of small towns: faded curtains, yellowed wallpaper, and a layer of dust on the lampshade. Thoughts of my son plagued me. Could I actually be wrong? Was my aging mind, traumatized by Afghanistan and the loss of my wife, simply clinging to the possibility of being needed again? I didn't know. But one thing I knew for certain: I needed to check on my heart. The cardiologist in Portland had been deadly serious when discussing possible outcomes, and I didn't want to kick the bucket before ensuring Nathan was safe. Stone Valley Regional Hospital occupied a 3-story red brick building with white columns, typical 1950s architecture. Inside smelled of antiseptic and old furniture. At the registration desk sat a nurse with a mop of red hair and tired eyes. She glanced at me without particular interest. "How can I help?" "I need a heart checkup," I said, producing my medical record which I'd prudently brought from home. I have ischemic heart disease, and my cardiologist recommended regular examinations, especially during travel. She took the file, reviewed it, and nodded. Dr. Mitchell is making rounds, but his assistant can see you. Fill out these forms and wait in the corridor. I settled into a plastic chair and began filling out the forms, watching the staff from the corner of my eye. I was less concerned about my heart than monitoring medication control. The first signs of serious drug trafficking always manifest in hospitals: disappearance of certain medications, strange supply interruptions, prescriptions written for non-existent patients. I was so absorbed in observation that I didn't immediately notice the man who stopped nearby. He stood leaning against the wall, thin, of medium height, with perpetually disheveled dark hair and deep-set brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything around them. His hands trembled slightly, and coffee stains dotted his white coat. He stared at me as if trying to remember where he'd seen me before. I returned the same look, trying to understand what seemed familiar about him. Then he said, "You're Nathan's father." It wasn't a question. I slowly nodded, trying not to reveal my surprise. "You know my son." "We served together," he replied simply. "Miguel Sanchez, but everyone calls me Sench." And then I remembered. His photograph stood on Nathan's mantelpiece. A group of soldiers, all in camouflage, Afghan dust on their faces. But the man in the photograph looked stronger, healthier. The person before me had clearly been through some kind of hell. "James Elliot," I introduced myself, shaking his hand and nodding that his palm was dry and hot. Sench looked around as if checking whether anyone was listening, then nodded toward a service corridor. "Come with me. I don't think your heart needs examination more than you need a conversation." I followed him, feeling an instinctive trust in this gaunt man. We passed several offices, descended a staircase, and ended up in a small room stacked with boxes of medications and sterile materials. "Why are you here, Mr. Elliot?" he asked, closing the door. "And don't tell me about your heart. I saw you examining our medication accounting system. What are you looking for?" I hesitated only for a moment. Something about this man, perhaps the same weary vigilance I saw in my mirror every morning, inspired trust. "My son is in danger," I said quietly, "and he won't listen to me." Something changed in Sench's eyes. He looked at me intently, then pulled keys from his lab coat pocket. "Wait here," he said, and left. Sanchez returned 5 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee from a vending machine. "What exactly did you see?" he asked without preamble, handing me a plastic cup. I told him everything, about Caitlin's meeting with the sheriff at the diner, about the package exchange by the bridge, about Nathan's reaction to my warning. With each word, Sench's face grew grimmer. When I finished, he remained silent for a long time, tapping his fingers against the wall. Finally, he spoke. "This is worse than I thought." He stood and approached a locked cabinet, retrieved a key from his bunch, and opened it. Inside, instead of the expected medications, were empty shelves with labels. "See this?" Sench pointed to the half-empty cabinet. "This should store opioid analgesics and other strictly controlled substances. 3 months ago, we had twice as many, and we haven't used that many on patients." He carefully locked the cabinet and turned to face me. "Caldwell has the entire town by the throat. 2 pharmacies closed in the last year. Competition with his supply chain proved impossible. He controls everything that enters and leaves this town." "And how is my son's wife involved in this?" Sanchez gave a bitter smile, and in that smile I glimpsed a reflection of personal pain. "Caitlin tried to seduce me 6 months ago to gain access to prescription forms and medications," he said, examining his trembling hands. "I refused, and the next day my car was burned, supposedly an accident, electrical short circuit." "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. To Caldwell, he laughed, but there was no humor in it. Or to his deputy Harry, who happens to be his wife's cousin. This is a small town, Mr. Elliot. Everyone's either complicit or intimidated. He moved closer, lowering his voice. According to one of my patients from the highway patrol, the sheriff uses Nathan's hiking routes as cover for moving drugs through mountain passes where road patrols have been increased. Your son, unwittingly, has become the perfect cover. Who would suspect a respected survival instructor, a veteran with an impeccable reputation, that a courier might be hiding among his group? Something cold and heavy settled in my chest. Nathan has nothing to do with this, I said firmly. I know, Sench nodded. Nathan is a good man. His voice trembled. He pulled me out of the hell of addiction after I returned from Afghanistan. When everyone else turned away, he stayed close, forced me to get treatment, found me a job. I owe him a debt I can never repay. But I couldn't do anything when he brought that woman and introduced her as his fiancée. She charmed him, and I was too weak to change anything. I remembered Caitlin's amber eyes, cold, calculating, and understood that she truly could have enchanted my son, starved for family warmth. We need evidence, I said. Otherwise, Nathan will never believe. Sench cautiously peered into the corridor, confirmed that no one was there, and closed the door more tightly. I'll help you, he said. But I should warn you, if Caldwell discovers we're digging into his business, we'll both end up in body bags deep in the Cascades. I grinned, feeling something long forgotten awakening in me, the thrill of the hunt. Son, I survived Afghanistan when your parents were still in school. I'm not that easy to pack into a bag. Aye. For the next 2 days, Sench and I transformed into a genuine surveillance team. He had acquired a directional microphone, which we modified to record conversations at a distance. I bought binoculars, camouflage netting, and 2 walkie-talkies at a hardware store. Sench borrowed an old maintenance van from a friend, allowing us to move inconspicuously around town. We divided responsibilities. Sench tracked Caitlin while I observed the sheriff. Each evening, we met in my motel room, comparing notes and constructing a complete picture. Remarkable how quickly old skills return, I thought, setting up an observation post on a hill overlooking the sheriff's office. As if those 50 years had never happened, and I was once again a reconnaissance lieutenant tracking Mujahideen movements in the mountains. On the second day of observations, Sench and I parked the van across from Nathan's company office. Through tinted windows, we recorded everything. How Caitlin arrived before anyone else, how she copied documents, how she hid something in her purse before employees arrived. At noon, she drove to the supermarket, and we followed at a safe distance. The microphone and binoculars helped us see and hear her passing an envelope to the sheriff's deputy by the canned goods aisle. Their conversation was brief and businesslike. Here are the updated routes for next week, Caitlin said, extending a thick envelope. Nathan plans to change the standard path because of a rockslide on the Eastern Trail. Ray won't be happy, replied the deputy, tucking the envelope into his inner pocket. We've already arranged the drop point with the guys at the old location. Tell him not to worry. I'll convince Nathan to stick with the previous route. I'll say there's a group that needs an easier trail. When they parted, Sench turned to me with a pale face. God, they're coordinating drug transport along Nathan's routes, he whispered. If they're planning a major delivery and Nathan happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, suspect something. He didn't finish the sentence, but we both understood the unspoken. Nathan could become a witness, and Caldwell didn't leave witnesses. I silently clenched my fists, feeling rage building inside me. Not the hot, youthful rage that leads to recklessness, but cold, calculating anger that sharpens the mind. We need to warn Nathan, I said, immediately. I called my son every hour, but Caitlin always answered, saying Nathan was busy or out of range. When on the third attempt she irritably asked if I wanted to leave a message, I realized this couldn't continue. Time was running out and I was getting nowhere. We need to go to his house, I decided, right now. I'll come with you, Sench volunteered, but I shook my head. Better not. If both of us show up, it will look like a conspiracy. I'll manage. Sench reluctantly agreed, giving me his phone number and extracting a promise to call if anything went wrong. Approaching my son's house, I saw Caitlin's silver SUV in the driveway, so she was home. This complicated matters, but there was no choice. Nathan had to know the truth. I rang the doorbell, mentally preparing for a difficult conversation. The door opened, and Caitlin stood on the threshold. For several seconds we silently stared at each other, then she spoke with a cold smile. You didn't get the hint, James. Nathan made it clear he doesn't want to see you. No hard feelings, but I believe he showed you the door. I don't hold it against him. I need to talk to my son, I said, trying to maintain composure. It's important. He's busy, she cut me off, blocking the entrance. And even if he weren't, he wouldn't talk to you. You've done enough damage to our family with your delusional accusations. I stepped forward, intending to move past her. Listen, I don't know what you've dragged my son into, but… One more step, her voice hardened, and I'll call the police for trespassing. In her eyes I saw no fear, only cold calculation and the confidence of someone accustomed to threats working. I stepped back but didn't surrender. Caitlin, think about what you're doing. If Nathan learns the truth… He already knows your truth, she interrupted, and he's made his choice. Now get out. As I walked back to my car, I heard an approaching vehicle. A black and white police SUV stopped at the house, and from it emerged a young deputy sheriff, the same one to whom Caitlin had handed an envelope. Mr. Elliott, he called out, Sheriff Caldwell asked me to give you this. He extended an envelope with an official seal. What is it? I asked, not hurrying to take it. A harassment warning, he replied in an even voice. The next step is an arrest warrant. The sheriff strongly recommends you leave the county. I took the envelope, fighting the urge to throw it in his smug face. Tell the sheriff I received his warning. The deputy nodded, got back in the car and drove away, leaving me standing there, clutching a paper that was essentially not a warning but a declaration of war. The next morning began with a decision to meet Sench. Calling him, I learned he was on the early shift and could only see me at noon. I pulled out of the motel parking lot, intending to grab breakfast at a diner on the outskirts, when I noticed flashing police lights in my rearview mirror. Cursing under my breath, I pulled over to the shoulder. Two officers approached the car, young with hard stares. One of them knocked on the window. License and vehicle registration, please. I handed over the requested items. What's the problem, officer? Routine check, he answered, examining my documents. Please step out of the vehicle. I complied, knowing argument was pointless. They were clearly looking for a pretext to arrest me. Open the trunk, sir. While one officer checked the trunk, the second began searching the cabin. After a few minutes, he straightened up, holding a small bag of white powder. Well, what do we have here? He said with feigned surprise. Looks like something illegal. At your age, Grandpa. That's not mine, I said, feeling cold fury give way to anxiety. You planted it. They all say that, the officer smirked. Turn around and place your hands on the hood. They searched me, handcuffed me, and transported me to the station, a small brick building with a flag at the entrance and bars on the windows. Inside, they led me to a holding cell, removed the handcuffs, and locked the door. The cell was tiny, with a metal bunk, thin mattress, and a seatless toilet in the corner. Weak light filtered through a barred window near the ceiling. I sat on the bunk, assessing the situation. They couldn't hold me long. The planted drugs weren't enough for a serious charge. My fingerprints weren't on them, and my background was impeccable. This was simply a way to intimidate, to demonstrate power. An hour later, the cell door opened, and on the threshold appeared Sheriff Caldwell, a tall blonde with military bearing and cold blue eyes. He looked at me with a slight smile that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Elliot," he drawled, "you don't take hints." "But I do recognize planted evidence," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. He laughed as if he'd heard a good joke. "What evidence? My officers were just doing their job. Our town suffers from drug trafficking, we check all visitors, and here's the result." "What do you want, Sheriff?" The smile vanished from his face. "In our little town, we don't like strangers who stick their noses where they don't belong. Especially old, sick strangers who might die of a heart attack in a cell at any moment." This wasn't a veiled threat. It was a direct promise. I realized I might not leave this place unless someone intervened from outside. And as if in answer to my thoughts, loud voices sounded in the corridor, and seconds later, Dr. Miguel Sanchez appeared in the cell doorway. He wore a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck, looking like the embodiment of medical authority. "Sheriff," his voice was firm and official, "I received a message that you've detained a patient with severe heart failure. Why was there no request for medical examination?" Caldwell turned to him, narrowing his eyes. "We've got a visiting grandpa detained with drugs, doctor. No need for examination." "Really?" Sench raised an eyebrow. "Well, the county hospital's attorney thinks otherwise. Mr. Elliot has documented heart disease. If anything happens to him in your cell without prior medical examination, it will be on your conscience. And in newspaper headlines, of course." The sheriff hesitated, clearly weighing options. Finally, he stepped back. "Fine, doctor, take your patient. But let him remember, next time won't be so easy." As they processed me out, returning my personal belongings, Caldwell approached and whispered so only I could hear. "Leave while you're still in one piece. Otherwise, they'll find you overdosed in a motel room. Tragic accident with an old man who lost count of his pills." Outside, Sench helped me into his car. My hands trembled not from fear but from anger. "You took a risk," I said once we'd driven away from the station. "Now you're on their list too." "I've been there for a long time," he grimly replied. "They just needed me until now. I'm the only doctor willing to work for pennies in this hole, but now we both need help, and I know where to find it." "Vi. The last trail isn't just a bar," Sench explained as we drove along a winding road toward the county line. "It's a place where there's someone who can help us." "And who are we looking for?" I asked. "Her name is Emily Donovan, lieutenant in the narcotics division of the neighboring county. Rumor has it she's been trying to trace Caldwell for a year, but she has no jurisdiction in Stone Valley." The bar turned out to be a single-story wooden building with a neon sign and a parking lot filled with battered pickups. Inside it was dark, smelling of beer and fried potatoes. There weren't many patrons, a few truckers at the counter, a couple of locals by the pool table, a lone woman in the corner. Sench nodded toward the woman. "That's her." We approached her table. Donovan proved to be a short, athletic woman with cropped chestnut hair and piercing gray eyes. She looked to be in her mid to late 30s. As we approached, she tensed, and I noticed her hand instinctively twitch toward her waist, where she probably kept a gun. "Sench," she nodded. "Long time no see. What do you need?" "To talk," I interjected, "about Ray Caldwell and drug trafficking through Stone Valley." "I don't know what you're talking about, old-timer," she cut me off. "And I don't engage in conversations with strangers about illegal activities." I understood her caution. In her position, trust was equivalent to death, but I had no time for long courtship. "I know who you are. You can trust me. I have evidence that Sheriff Caldwell and Caitlin Elliott are using my son's hiking company routes to transport drugs," I said directly. I have photos of meetings, recorded conversations, and a witness who can confirm their involvement in illegal trafficking." She remained silent, but I could see I'd piqued her interest. And I added, removing the envelope the deputy had given me, "You might be interested to learn how Caldwell intimidates dissenters." Emily took the envelope, reviewed its contents, and gestured for us to sit. "Show me what you've got," she said in a different tone. I laid out on the table the photos I'd taken with my old phone and the records Cinch and I had kept. She studied them silently, methodically, like a professional. "I've been trying to trace the source of drug trafficking for a year," she finally admitted. "But I have no official right to investigate in Stone Valley. Every time we get closer, the trail breaks at the county border." She pulled out her phone, opened a photo, and showed us. "This is Mike Lennox, our undercover agent. Went to Stone Valley 3 months ago and disappeared. Officially, quit and moved to California. Unofficially, his body was found in the neighboring state with a bullet in the back of his head. Local police closed the case as a drug addict's suicide." Cinch paled, and I felt my stomach tighten. "Caldwell isn't just a corrupt cop," Emily continued. "He's a dangerous psychopath. He has people everywhere and he'll stop at nothing." "What do we do?" asked Cinch. Emily thought for a moment, tapping her fingers on the table. "I need to talk to my superiors. With your evidence, we might get a federal judge's warrant for investigation, but that will take time." "We don't have time," I objected. "My son could be in danger at any moment." She looked at me intently. "What do you suggest?" "Continue gathering evidence," I said, "and be ready to intervene when the next major delivery becomes known." Emily nodded. "I can provide limited support. Some of my people live here in the blind zone. But we'll have to act very carefully. If Caldwell suspects something, he'll immediately start cleaning up loose ends." She pulled a small phone from her pocket and handed it to me. "This device is protected from wiretapping. Use it only to contact me." As we were leaving the bar, Emily placed her hand on my shoulder. "Your son faces real danger. They don't leave witnesses." "I know," I replied, feeling the weight of those words pressing on my heart. "That's why I'm here." In the twilight, Cinch and I returned to Stone Valley, knowing we'd entered a game where the stakes included not only our lives but also my son's. And for the first time in many years, I prayed, not to God, in whom I'd long ceased to believe, but to my old reconnaissance instincts, which had never failed me. Chapter 3: The Abduction. I spent a sleepless night in the motel, replaying in my mind the meeting with Emily Donovan. She'd promised to maintain contact through the secure phone but warned that obtaining federal warrants was a slow process, and Caldwell was growing increasingly suspicious. "He's covering his tracks," she said before parting. These words kept me awake. Rain drummed against the motel roof, counting down time that was growing ever shorter. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking of Nathan. My son, my blood, as stubborn as I am. Could he have begun to suspect something on his own? Or had his blind love for Caitlin completely clouded his judgment? My question was answered the very next day. Cinch called early in the morning, his voice anxious. "Nathan called me an hour ago. Wants to meet at the last trail at noon. Says it's urgent." My heart skipped a beat. "Is he all right?" Sounded strange, tense. Said he found something I need to see. "I'll go with you," I said decisively. "No," Cinch objected. "He specifically arranged the meeting outside the county, meaning he's afraid of being noticed. If he sees you, he might leave altogether. Let me talk to him first." I reluctantly agreed, though the thought of inaction rankled me. Cinch promised to call immediately after the meeting and hung up. The next 4 hours I spent like a caged animal, packing the room, peering out the window, checking the secure phone. Cinch called at exactly 2 in the afternoon. "He knows," were his first words. "At least he suspects." What happened? Nathan discovered discrepancies in the company's financial reports, and also, when he checked the equipment warehouse, he found a backpack with a false bottom. Inside were traces of white powder. I cursed under my breath. That's not all, Sench continued. He noticed Caitlin behaving strangely, ending phone calls when he appears, inventing reasons to change planned routes. He remembered your warnings. Did he believe me? I held my breath. Not entirely, he said. Maybe the old man was right about Caitlin and the sheriff, but I need to confirm it myself. He plans to follow her this evening. A chill ran down my spine. That's too dangerous, if they realize he suspects them. I told him the same thing, Sench sighed. But you know Nathan, as stubborn as you. Yes, I knew my son. Even raised without my influence, he'd inherited the worst of my character traits, unyielding stubbornness, and the need to figure everything out on his own. Where is he now? Back in Stone Valley. Said Caitlin is supposed to meet someone tonight, and he wants to follow her. I felt my chest constrict. This was bad, very bad. We have to warn him. He turned off his phone, Sench sounded guilty. Said he's afraid of wiretapping, promised to get in touch tomorrow. I clenched my fists so hard that my nails dug into my palms. Tomorrow may be too late. Aye. Late that evening, Sench and I parked in dense forest on a hill overlooking Nathan's house. The rain had intensified, turning into a genuine downpour that hampered observation. We sat in the old van, peering through binoculars across the rain-streaked glass. At 8 o'clock, Caitlin's silver SUV pulled out of the garage. A minute later, it was followed by a black Jeep I hadn't seen before. Behind the wheel sat Nathan in a dark jacket with the hood up. That's not his car, Sench noted. Must have rented it so she wouldn't recognize him. We maintained a respectable distance, following the two vehicles along winding mountain roads. Caitlin drove confidently, never looking back, clearly unaware of being followed. She turned onto a narrow forest trail barely discernible in the darkness. Where is she going? I muttered, staring into the darkness. That's an old hunting trail, Sench replied. Leads to abandoned cabins on the northern side of the mountain. There used to be a hunting club there, but it closed about 10 years ago. Now those cabins are used by smugglers and teenagers looking for a place to drink. Nathan stopped his car at a considerable distance from the trail, turned off the headlights, and continued on foot. We decided to follow his example, leaving the van and moving through the forest, trying to stay parallel to the trail. The rain had turned the earth into slippery muck. I felt my knee with the embedded shrapnel aching, but I stubbornly pressed forward, clutching tree branches for balance. Sench moved beside me, breathing heavily. Years of addiction had taken their toll on his lungs. After half an hour we saw light, an old hunting cabin, roughly hewn from timbers darkened by time. Beside it stood 4 vehicles: Caitlin's silver SUV, Caldwell's police jeep, a black Ford with tinted windows, and an old pickup. We took position on a small rise, concealed by juniper bushes. From here, through a gap between imperfectly closed shutters, we could see the cabin's interior. Inside burned a kerosene lamp, illuminating a crude table covered with maps and some packages. Around the table stood Caitlin, Caldwell, and 2 unfamiliar men with heavy jaws and cold eyes. His people, Sench whispered. The one on the left is Mike Garland, former bouncer from Redwood City. The right one is Larry Thompson, ex-Marine with a bad reputation. Both served time for assault. They bent over a map and Caitlin pointed at something, running her finger across the paper. Her face, usually calm and friendly, now looked hard and focused. The mask had finally slipped. Here at Bear Creek is the perfect spot, her voice carried to us. The trail is narrow with cliffs on both sides. We can simulate a fall. Caldwell nodded, never taking his eyes off the map. And no witnesses. This time of year nobody goes there. My stomach clenched into a cold knot. They were planning a murder, the murder of my son. Suddenly, from the forest came the sound of a breaking branch. All heads in the cabin turned toward the window, and Caldwell pulled out a gun. "Check it out," he ordered the thugs curtly, and they rushed outside, switching on powerful flashlights. Sench and I froze, pressing ourselves to the ground. Beams of light slid across the undergrowth, approaching our hiding place. One of Caldwell's men passed literally a meter from us, but rain and darkness concealed our presence. "Someone was there," shouted the second thug, pointing at trampled bushes. "The track leads toward the road." I felt my heart skip a beat. Nathan, they'd spotted Nathan. Aye, aye, aye. Sench and I exchanged glances, understanding each other without words. We needed to quickly reach the car and warn Emily. Moving cautiously, we retreated deeper into the forest, staying away from the pursuers whose flashlights flickered between trees. When we were almost at the van, shouts erupted in the forest, followed by a dull thud and choice curses. "They caught him," Sench murmured, turning pale. I clenched my teeth, fighting the urge to rush to help. There were 2 of us against 5 armed people, not counting Caitlin. Direct confrontation would end quickly and badly. "We need to call Emily," I said, pulling out the secure phone. "There's no signal in these mountains," Sench shook his head. "We need to get to the main road." We reached the van and drove toward the highway, constantly looking back to see if a police car was following. Once in range, I immediately dialed Emily's number. "They've captured my son," I said without preamble, "in the old hunting cabin in the northern part of the preserve." "My source just reported activity in that area," she replied. "I'm on my way. Where are you?" 10 miles from the cabin, on Highway 14. "Stay there, I'll send someone for you." "No time," I objected. "They were talking about an accident at Bear Creek. They're planning to stage Nathan falling from a cliff." A heavy pause hung on the line. "Listen to me carefully," Emily finally said. "Don't do anything stupid. I'm assembling a team, but it will take time. Help will arrive in 2 hours, not sooner." "In 2 hours it might be too late," I argued. "If you burst in there without backup, everyone will die. You, your son, Dr. Sanchez. Caldwell doesn't leave witnesses." I understood her logic, but couldn't just sit and wait while my son was in danger. "I have a plan," I said after a pause. "But we'll need your support when you arrive. The person you trust works as a ranger. Jim Harper, right?" "How do you know?" Her voice registered surprise. "My job in Afghanistan," I answered briefly. "To know what I shouldn't know, contact him. Have him meet us at the old ranger cabin on the western slope. It's closest to Bear Creek." Emily was silent, clearly weighing options. "All right," she finally said. "But be careful. If something goes wrong, retreat immediately. That's an order, Mr. Elliot." I smiled into the darkness. "I'm retired, Lieutenant. I don't have to follow orders anymore." IV. Jim Harper, a lean man with a weathered face and a penetrating gaze, met us at the ranger cabin at midnight precisely. He looked concerned but collected. "Emily said you've got trouble," he began without preamble, shaking our hands. "Something involving Caldwell and Bear Creek." "They've captured my son," I said, "planning to stage an accident." Harper's expression darkened. "I noticed unusual movement on the trails this evening. Thought it was poachers, so I reported to Emily." He shook his head. "Few people know these places. If they chose Bear Creek, they planned it carefully. There's a deep canyon there, a terrifying place even in daylight. The body might not be found for weeks." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "How do we get there?" Harper unfolded a map on the hood of his Jeep. "There's a shorter trail through the western slope. It's used only by rangers to check photo trap cameras for wildlife. If they transport your son via the main road, we can get ahead of them by exiting here." He pointed to a spot on the map. "But it's a difficult route, especially in rain and darkness." "We'll manage," I said confidently, though the pain in my knee was already making itself known. The cabin has equipment, Harper continued. Ropes, flashlights, first aid kit, take whatever you need. Meanwhile, Cinch was packing his medical bag, adding medications from the ranger's supplies. I don't know what condition we'll find Nathan in, he muttered, checking syringes. Need to be prepared for anything. While we prepared, Harper received a message on his radio. He listened, frowning, then turned to us. Just spotted 2 vehicles moving along the northern road toward Bear Creek. Police SUV and a black Ford. I felt everything inside me contract. How much time do we have? If we leave now and move quickly, we might intercept them at the creek, Harper replied. But it won't be easy. I checked the pockets of my jacket, military knife, compass, binoculars. I felt the pill organizer in my pants pocket with heart medication. Not now, I mentally commanded my old, worn-out heart. Hold on a little longer. Time to go, I ordered, and we stepped out into the rain and darkness. The ranger trail proved a nightmare, a narrow strip of sodden earth winding along a steep slope. Each step required concentration, and rain trickled down my collar, seeping under my jacket. My old bones creaked with strain, but I stubbornly pressed forward, thinking only of my son. Cinch held up admirably, though his breathing grew increasingly raspy. Harper moved ahead, occasionally stopping to let us catch our breath. He knew these places like the back of his hand, unerringly choosing a path in pitch darkness. After an hour of arduous climbing, we reached a small clearing that overlooked Bear Creek Canyon. Below, in the moonlight, shimmered a sinuous ribbon of water, with sheer cliffs looming above it. Here, Harper pointed, they should appear from that side of the gorge. There's only one place where you can drive so close to the edge. We took position behind a rock outcropping that sheltered us from rain and wind. Cinch pulled a thermos of coffee from his backpack and poured it into small plastic cups. The hot liquid scalded my throat but gave me strength. How will we proceed? Harper asked, checking his rifle. We need to separate them, I said, recalling old times. If they're all together, we don't stand a chance. But how? Cinch looked concerned. There are at least 4 of them, all armed. I thought for a moment, surveying the gorge. A diversion. Cinch, can you imitate the sounds of a large animal? A bear, for example. Sanchez raised his eyebrows in surprise, but nodded. I don't know about a bear, but I'll think of something. Great. When they appear, you'll make the sound from that side of the bushes. Someone will definitely go check. I'll take care of him, and you and Harper cover me and be ready to intervene if something goes wrong. What if they just shoot Nathan at the first sign of danger? Harper asked. I don't think so. I shook my head. Caldwell wants everything to look like an accident without gunshot wounds. They'll more likely try to take us out of play than create extra noise. We discussed the plan details, and I suddenly felt a strange calmness, as if the last 50 years had evaporated, and I was again that young lieutenant planning an operation in the mountains. The difference was that now at stake was not the lives of unknown soldiers, but my son. The wait stretched into torturous minutes. The rain gradually subsided, clouds parting to reveal a starry sky. Somewhere in the distance an owl hooted, and the sound seemed an ominous portent. Finally, headlights appeared on the road. 2 vehicles slowly moved along the winding mountain road, approaching the cliff edge. I raised my binoculars and saw them, the police SUV and black Ford. They stopped about 100 meters from the edge, and 4 figures emerged from the cars. Caldwell's 2 thugs pulled someone from the Ford's back seat, a limp body that barely seemed able to stand. My heart contracted. Nathan. Even at this distance, I could see he was seriously injured. His head hung down, clothes torn and covered with dark stains that could only be blood. Time to move, I whispered, and we set out, approaching the scene from different directions. Vi. We took positions in the dense undergrowth surrounding the small clearing by the cliff edge. From here, I could clearly see two thugs holding Nathan, who appeared to be unconscious. His face was covered in blood, clothes torn, and his right leg dragged as if he couldn't put weight on it. One of Caldwell's henchmen, Larry, was methodically preparing a spot at the cliff's edge, clearing away rocks and branches. "Boss said make it look believable," Larry muttered, stepping back to assess his work. "So any expert would say, yeah, a bear attacked, he ran from it and fell." "Just finish quickly," Mike grumbled, nervously looking around. "I don't like this place. They say real bears roam here." "Scared?" Larry smirked. "Don't worry, Mikey, Uncle Larry will protect you." Mike cursed, turning away from his partner. At that moment, Nathan quietly groaned, regaining consciousness. His eyes opened slightly, and I saw pain and fear in them. This had to stop, now. I raised my hand, signaling to Sench. He nodded and began executing his part of the plan, emitting a low, threatening growl that echoed through the gorge. The sound was so realistic that goosebumps ran down my spine. The reaction was instantaneous. Larry and Mike froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "What was that?" Mike whispered, nervously grabbing his gun. "Sounds like a bear," Larry replied, also drawing his weapon. "Check it out, I'll stay with the guy." Mike headed in the direction of the sound, illuminating his path with a flashlight. His gun hand trembled, betraying his nervousness. He approached the spot where Sench was hiding, who again emitted a growl, this time closer. Sench growled once more, now from a different direction, confusing him. Mike panicked, spinning in place, trying to determine the source of the sound. This was my chance. While Larry's attention was diverted to his partner, I silently crept up from behind, using bushes as cover. My old bones protested against such acrobatics, but a scout's experience and adrenaline did their work. I positioned myself directly behind Larry while he peered puzzled into the darkness. 1 second, and my military knife was at his throat, my other hand clamped over his mouth, preventing any sound. "Not a word," I whispered in his ear, "or I'll cut your throat faster than you can blink." Larry froze, his body tensing, ready to resist, but I was prepared. With a precise movement, I pressed on his carotid artery, a technique I'd learned half a century ago and hadn't used since. Larry's eyes rolled back and he went limp, losing consciousness. I carefully lowered him to the ground, binding his hands with his own belt. Meanwhile, Sench imitated bear growls ever closer to Mike, forcing him to move farther from the action. Harper stealthily approached him from behind, and in one motion neutralized him, pinning him to the ground and twisting his arm behind his back. "Federal agent," he hissed, though it was a lie. "Don't move if you want to live." I rushed to Nathan, who was trying to focus his gaze, not understanding what was happening. "Son," I whispered, carefully cutting the ropes binding his wrists. "It's me, you're safe." Nathan blinked, trying to comprehend who stood before him. His face was covered in dried blood, one eye swollen shut, lips split. "D-Dad," he finally managed, "you came." "Of course I came," I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I'll always come for you." Nathan tried to smile but instead winced in pain and lost consciousness. I caught him, preventing him from falling, and at that moment Sench appeared beside me, quickly checking his pulse and pupils. "Concussion, 2 broken ribs, multiple bruises," he diagnosed. "We need to get him to a safe place immediately and provide medical care." Harper, holding the bound Mike, nodded toward the forest. "My cabin is a mile from here. It has everything we need." We carefully lifted Nathan and moved along the trail leading away from the cliff. I carried my son in my arms, amazed at where my old body found such strength. But at that moment, I could have carried him across the entire state if necessary. We had only moved a short distance from the edge when we heard an approaching vehicle. Caldwell. He had undoubtedly come to check if everything had gone according to plan. Hurry, Harper whispered. If he discovers his men are gone, he'll raise the alarm. We quickened our pace, moving deeper into the forest. Behind us came shouts and curses. Caldwell had found the bound Larry. He'll be looking for us, Harper said when we were already half a mile from the scene. But the rain washed away the tracks, and even in daylight it's hard to find anyone in these woods. Emily will be here soon, I reminded. And we have Mike, who can tell us a lot about his boss's operations. Mike, whom Harper led before him, stared at the ground. I won't say anything. Caldwell will get to me even in federal prison. How about this? I said quietly. You tried to kill a special forces officer. Nathan is a war hero. Think they'll just let you go after that? Mike paled, realizing the gravity of his situation. We reached Harper's cabin as the first rays of dawn touched the treetops. Harper opened the door and we carried Nathan inside, carefully laying him on a narrow cot. Sench immediately got to work, cleaning wounds and splinting broken ribs. I stood nearby, unable to tear my gaze from my son. His face, even covered with bruises and cuts, looked peaceful, as if now, unconscious, he had finally found tranquility. He'll pull through, Sench said, seemingly reading my thoughts. He's strong. Just like you, father, Harper added, handing me a mug of hot coffee. I accepted the mug, feeling my hands tremble, not from fear or cold, but from relief. My son was alive, battered, beaten, but alive, and I was beside him when he needed me. For the first time in many years, I felt I was truly fulfilling my duty as a father. And this feeling was stronger than fatigue, pain, and fear. It gave meaning to each beat of my worn-out heart. Chapter 4, Reckoning. Dawn found me sitting beside the cot where my son lay. For almost 24 hours, Nathan had remained unconscious while Sench fought for his life in the cramped ranger cabin. I hadn't left his side for a moment, except to stretch my bones aching from immobility. Through the small window filtered a golden ray of sunlight, the first in several days. Harper dozed in a chair by the door, guarding our prisoner Mike, whom we had bound and kept in the corner. At Sench's insistence, we'd given Mike painkillers. Harper had broken his wrist during the arrest. I watched my son's tormented face, the fresh scars that I knew would remain with him for life, and inside me pulsed cold fury. Caldwell and Caitlin would pay for each drop of Nathan's blood. Nathan opened his eyes just as Sench was changing the bandage on his head. At first, his gaze wandered around the room, unfocused, but then rested on me. Dad, his voice was hoarse from thirst, this isn't a dream. No, son, I moved closer, helping him rise slightly to take a sip of water from a cup. I'm here, you're safe. Sench smiled, satisfied with his patient's condition. Concussion, 2 broken ribs, multiple bruises, but internal organs untouched, he reported. He'll pull through, he's strong. Nathan grimaced from pain but stubbornly tried to sit up. I helped him, placing my folded jacket behind his back. What happened? He asked, looking around the cabin. Where are we? In Ranger Harper's cabin, I nodded to the dozing ranger. Sench, Harper, and I pulled you out when Caldwell's men were about to throw you off the cliff at Bear Creek. Recognition of what had happened flickered in Nathan's eyes. His face contorted with anger and pain. Caitlin, she was with them. When they caught me by the hunting cabin, she laughed while Caldwell beat me. I silently nodded, not knowing how to comfort my son. Betrayal by a loved one leaves wounds deeper than any knife or bullet. Nathan unexpectedly grabbed my hand with such force that I was amazed. You were right, he exhaled. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. How could I insult you like that? Love for my wife blinded me. I was blind and dared to throw out my own father. I can't forgive myself. His voice broke and I saw my grown son, a battle-hardened warrior, barely holding back tears. I gripped his hand firmly in response. There'll be time for apologies. Now we need to stop Caldwell and your wife. Nathan straightened, despite the pain. In his eyes appeared determination that I knew so well, the same look I had when embarking on missions from which no one expected to return alive. "I know where and when a major delivery is happening," he said. They discussed it in front of me, thinking I'd never be able to tell anyone. Harper, awakened by our conversation, reached for his radio. "We need to contact Emily," he said. "She should be close by now." Within half an hour, the Ranger's cabin became headquarters for an improvised special operation. Emily Donovan arrived with minimal backup, only those she absolutely trusted. 4 men and 1 woman, all with military bearing and tense faces, gathered around the table where a map was spread. So Emily began, "What do we know?" Nathan, overcoming pain, pointed to a spot on the map. "Tomorrow at noon, in the same hunting cabin where they tortured me, a major exchange will take place. From fragments of conversation I heard, it's about 50 kilograms of contraband, which they'll then distribute along my company's routes, mixing them in with regular tourist groups." "How do they plan to accomplish this?" Emily asked, making notes in her notebook. "Caitlin devised a system," bitterness colored Nathan's voice. "Some clients are plants working for Caldwell. They sign up for hikes and carry contraband, crossing county lines where road patrols have been increased. The instructors, meaning me and my employees, don't even suspect we're providing cover for drug trafficking." "Clever," Emily nodded. "Who would suspect tourists with hiking backpacks, especially when led by a respected Special Forces veteran with an impeccable reputation?" She turned to her team. "What's the status on the warrant?" One of her people, a short man with attentive eyes, handed her a folder. "Federal judge signed it an hour ago. We have authority to conduct an operation with the arrest of drug trafficking suspects." "Excellent," Emily looked satisfied. "But we need irrefutable evidence. They must be caught red-handed, money, drugs, everything must be documented. Otherwise, with connections like Caldwell's, he'll walk free." I exchanged glances with Nathan, understanding what he was thinking. My son didn't just want arrest and trial. He craved justice, wanted to see Caitlin's face when she realized she'd lost. "I have a plan," Nathan said, "and it will require cold heads and precise actions from all of us." "Aye, aye." The next day, the operation to capture the drug network unfolded at the same hunting cabin where Nathan had been tortured. The plan was simple yet risky. Classic military tactics I'd used in Afghanistan. Lure the enemy onto their own territory but change the rules of the game. I took position on a hill with binoculars and radio transmitter, coordinating all groups' actions. Despite Sench's protests, Nathan insisted on participating. "Won't sleep soundly until I see them arrested," he stubbornly declared. We ultimately placed him in a shelter near the cabin, where he could observe events without exposing himself to unnecessary risk. Emily and her team positioned themselves around the perimeter, ready to burst in on signal. Sench waited in a car with medical equipment, in case someone got hurt. "First vehicle approaching," I whispered into the radio, noticing Caitlin's silver SUV appearing around the bend in the forest road. "I see it," Emily responded. "Maintain positions." Caitlin looked immaculate stepping out of the car, neatly styled blonde hair, crisp pantsuit, composed face. Nothing in her appearance betrayed a person who yesterday laughed watching her husband being beaten. She retrieved a leather briefcase from the trunk and headed toward the cabin. 10 minutes later, Caldwell's police jeep arrived. The sheriff wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, leather jacket, sunglasses hiding cold blue eyes. He carefully surveyed the surroundings before taking a case from the car and walking to the cabin. "Caldwell in position," I reported, waiting for the courier. We didn't have to wait long. The third car, an inconspicuous sedan with tinted windows, parked a short distance away. From it emerged a short, nervous man in a denim jacket, the same one I'd seen by the bridge with Caitlin and Caldwell. He carried a sports bag. "Everyone's in place," I spoke into the microphone. "Ready." Through binocular optics, I observed the scene unfolding in the cabin. Caldwell opening his case, displaying stacks of money, the courier laying packages of white powder on the table, Caitlin methodically checking the quality with some device. "Bingo," Emily whispered over the radio, starting the operation on my signal. But before she could give the command, the cabin door flew open. In the doorway stood Nathan, pale, with a bandage on his head but straight and unbending as a steel rod. "Hello, darling," his voice, amplified by the microphone Emily had given him, carried across the clearing. "Miss me?" Caitlin screamed in horror at seeing her husband, whom she believed dead. Caldwell reacted instantly, drew his gun and aimed at Nathan, but I was already halfway to the cabin, circling around the back. I appeared behind Caldwell just as he was about to pull the trigger. My military knife with surgical precision plunged into his wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon. "Afghan trick," I smirked, kicking the gun away. "Never fails." Caldwell whirled toward me with a growl, but instead of a frightened old man, he faced a Special Forces veteran who'd found his second wind. We grappled in a short, fierce struggle, and I was surprised to discover I still remembered hand-to-hand combat techniques taught to me half a century ago. Caldwell was stronger and younger, but I wasn't fighting for myself. I was protecting my son. "Bastard," the sheriff rasped when I twisted his arm behind his back. "I'll destroy you." "Unlikely," I grunted, pinning him to the floor. "Your career is over." "Aye, aye." Emily and her team burst into the cabin, completing the operation. All members of the drug network were arrested red-handed, money, drugs, and weapons seized as evidence. Caitlin, trying to portray an innocent victim of circumstances, faltered when Nathan showed her phone-recorded conversations with Caldwell. "Don't bother, Caitlin," he said coldly. "We have recordings of all your conversations with Caldwell." She changed instantly, her eyes filling with hatred. "You never understood that survival requires much more than your idealistic principles," she spat. "This town deserved to be milked." Caldwell, handcuffed, continued threatening everyone with lawsuits for exceeding authority, but Emily calmly showed him the federal judge's warrant. "Game over, Sheriff," she said with a slight smile. "This time the law won." Watching the proceedings, I experienced a strange feeling, not triumph, but rather satisfaction at a job well done. Nathan stood beside me, and despite his physical pain, his face radiated inner peace, as if he'd finally shed a heavy burden. When the arrestees were led away, Emily approached us. "This is just the beginning," she warned. "Ahead lies a long process, testimony, trial. They'll fight and try to wriggle out." "We're ready," Nathan replied, and in that I heard what wasn't there before, acknowledgement of our connection, our unity. "You should leave Stone Valley," Emily continued. "Caldwell still has many supporters in town, for your safety." "I've been thinking about that," Nathan nodded. "Time to start fresh." IV. A month later, Nathan and I sat on the porch of his new home on Lake Windermere, with a view of the mountains. The house was smaller than the previous one, but it possessed a warmth that the former dwelling had lacked. Nathan had almost recovered from his injuries, though a scar above his right eyebrow remained permanent, a thin white line reminding us how close we'd come to losing each other. "You know," he said, watching the sunset painting the mountain peaks in golden pink hues, "I always thought the greatest betrayal was when comrades abandon you in battle. But now, I know nothing is more terrible than betrayal by someone you love." I silently placed my hand on my son's shoulder, not knowing how to express everything I felt. Words had never been my strong suit. "But there's nothing stronger than true family," I finally said. "I'm proud of you, son. Always have been, just didn't know how to show it." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon, when Emily's car appeared in the driveway. She'd received a promotion and now headed the narcotics division in both counties. After everything that happened, a special connection had formed between her and Nathan. I saw it in how their eyes softened when they met. Emily stepped out of the car, holding a folder with documents. "Caldwell and Caitlin are refusing a plea deal," she announced, climbing onto the porch. "They think they can wriggle out, but with our evidence and Mike's testimony, they don't stand a chance." "How's your team?" Nathan asked, offering her a chair. "Doing excellently, clearing Caldwell's network," she replied. "Turns out he had connections in 3 states. This is just the tip of the iceberg." Behind her pulled up Sench's battered pickup. He looked completely transformed over this month, as if he'd shed an invisible weight from his shoulders. His movements had become more confident, his eyes regained their sparkle, and his face showed a healthy color. "Hello, Elliott family," he called to us, removing a tube with blueprints from the pickup's cabin. "I've got news for you." Sench spread large sheets on the table, a project resembling a tourist complex. "Rehabilitation center for veterans through mountain expeditions," he explained enthusiastically. "Treating post-traumatic stress through contact with nature. What do you think?" Nathan studied the blueprints intently, interest appearing on his face. This could work," he said slowly. "I have experience organizing expeditions, you have medical knowledge. And we have extra land on the western slope," Emily added, pointing to the map. "Confiscated from Caldwell. The county council is ready to designate it for a socially significant project." I observed this scene, feeling strange contentment. Life continued, despite everything we'd endured, and it was better than I could have imagined. "What do you say, Dad?" Nathan turned to me. "Will you stay with us? I need a father, and in the future my children will need a grandfather." I blinked away, unexpected moisture in my eyes. My heart, worn by years of loneliness and bitterness, suddenly filled with warmth I'd long forgotten. "I'm staying," I simply answered, "till the end." Though I didn't know how much time I had left, months or years, I understood one thing: I had fulfilled my final duty. Not as a soldier, not as a man, but as a father. And that was the most important mission of my life. The sun had completely vanished beyond the horizon, dyeing the sky a deep blue. Stars ignited one by one, reminding us of the infinity of possibilities, even when time seems to be running out. In that moment, I knew, regardless of how many beats were allotted to my old heart, I would live them with dignity and purpose. And when the time came to depart, I would do so without regrets, knowing I hadn't failed those I loved more than life itself.